Welcome to another edition of UTalks, the podcast generated by Urban Learning Collaborative. We're joined here today with the incredible Mrs. Deanna Singh.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Oh, wow. It's really our pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
I had a chance to read through your bio, and you're such an accomplished person. It's hard to receive those flowers face to face, isn't it? But you're such an accomplished person, and you continue to strive for greatness. It's evident. So, can you tell the audience just a little bit about your background, who you are, what you're working on right now?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for those compliments. I really value being able to be in a place where I can actually be living in my purpose. So I think the way that I most like to introduce myself is really by describing what my purpose is.
Let's go for it then.
My purpose is to shift power to marginalized communities. And I have been so fortunate to be able to do that in a number of different ways in my life. So I have a very eclectic background, all kinds of different things. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, it's probably most important to note that I've always been deeply involved in education. I like to tell people in the education sector two things. Number one, I am a huge fan of all things educators. I would even go to the level of saying that I'm a groupie.
Okay.
Because whenever I see an educator and see people who are
Let me sign that autograph.
Yeah, go ahead and put that autograph right down for me. So that's one thing. The other thing I like to tell people kind of in the education space is that I've had the great fortune of actually being able to sit at every seat at the table.
Okay.
So of course I had the great opportunity to be a student, right? I am a parent now. I had the opportunity to run a school. So I've been an administrator. I've taught all the way from kindergarten up to the postgraduate level. And so for me, and I was a funder.
Okay.
So in all the different ways, you can kind of think about what it means to be in education. And the reason why that's such a source of pride for me is because I really do believe that education is the best vehicle that we have in order to be able to move forward. You know, if you think about that purpose of shifting power to marginalized communities, literally the best vehicle, the best tool that we have is making sure that everybody has access to a high quality education.
Well, Deanna, I'm a believer in that purpose. Tell us, what drives you or what drove you to develop that as your purpose, and what keeps you going within that?
So again, I feel like I was incredibly fortunate, right? At a very, very young age, I had a strong sense of that purpose. I used to describe it a little bit differently, right?
Sure.
Same ethos, but the way I described it was, I really want to multiply the blessings, experiences, and opportunities that I've been given. And I think for me, that idea of, wow, there's so many situations where I might be the first, but I certainly don't want to be the last, was kind of the motivation behind it, right? I was the first in my family to go to college, first in my family to go to graduate school, first in my family to be able to take on kind of a professional space, first social entrepreneur, just all these different things that were first. And I don't really take a lot of pride in that, right? That is what it is. That's a fact. But what I really get excited about is being able to make sure that there's room and space and that door is kicked wide open for other people to be able to come through it. And I think that's where the kind of shift happened, right? Where I started to really focus on this dynamic of power, because really everybody has the ability to thrive. I believe that at my core. I believe that we have innate things inside of us that are really unique to who we are as people, period. Sometimes it's harder to find that. Sometimes it's harder to access that. Sometimes it's harder to find, the rays of sunshine that we need to be able to grow that. And so for me, that's the space I like to operate in, because I feel like there is no greater feeling than being able to be part of somebody else's story.
Yeah. And Deanna, I want to be among the first to congratulate you for being honored by ULC at the 2024 Fall Ball. You will be honored with the Rising Star Award.
I'm over the moon. So Rising Star seems to make sense, because I am over the moon with this recognition.
All right. And I think it's well past due based on all that I've read about your work so far. You clearly are a leader. You clearly, in every space that you've walked into, you've assumed the mantle of leadership. So can you define leadership for us? What does that mean to you and all the work that you do?
That's such a great question because I think that leadership is actually something that is constantly changing shape.
Okay.
I don't think that leadership is something that's stagnant, right? In one situation or one context, I might be pulled to do something totally different than I would be able to do or need to do in a different space. So when I think about leadership, it's some of the characteristics, right, that I think kind of I would attribute to strong leaders. Number one, they're incredibly adaptable. I think another thing is that they define and sort of measure their success, not by how far they can go, but how far those around them can go. I think another thing that's a really strong characteristic is that they're constantly learning. I make so many mistakes every day. And I say that with great pride.
That's right.
Because you know what? It takes courage to make mistakes. And earlier, like in my life, I used to just abhor mistakes. Like, oh my gosh, I'd be so worried. Oh, what if I fail? And now I'm like, what if I fail? And I think that that's another characteristic of it, right? Is that it's the person who's willing to have that courage to be able to take those risks to say, whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve or who I'm trying to lead or who I'm trying to work alongside, that mission and vision is bigger than anything that I hold on my own. Yeah. So there's not a straightforward answer because I just think that all of those characteristics are components that have to take front and center in different situations.
Adaptability.
Yeah.
You really bring up an important point around there are no mistakes. There are lessons. In fact, I have that quote in my kitchen at home. It clearly says there are no mistakes. There are only lessons. Mm-hmm. And I decided to hang that when my son was a teenager, early teen years, because I wanted him to know that whatever we do in life, you have to recognize whether it was a good choice or maybe a not so good choice. I'll say that. I'll use the word bad. But whatever the consequence is for that choice, if it's a consequence that you really aren't proud of or something that was painful, learn from it.
Right.
Learn from it. And in every situation as an educator that I find myself in, I try to provide an environment where the people that I work with have a mistake-free environment, an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, an environment where we just learn from them. What are your additional thoughts?
So I always tell people, people say like fail fast, embrace failure, all these things. Yeah. And I'm like, get really, really good at it. Make it your superpower. Because at the end of the day, every person is going to fail. Every person.
Multiple times a day.
If you're living life multiple times a day, if you're honest multiple times a day. So if we're all going to do it, it's inevitable that it's going to happen. Why not get really, really good at it? Right? Sure. So I try to really encourage people to practice failing. Sure. As a matter of fact, I'm always trying something that I know is outside of my comfort zone. And I do it as part of my practice so that I can get really good at failing. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a market differentiator.
Yeah. Well, let's go down that path a little bit.
Sure.
You strike me as an optimist. Am I right?
I am a glass overfilling.
I knew it.
Not full, but
overflowing.
Yes, overflowing. Oh, yes.
Okay, so
you figured it out.
I think the audience figured it out too. It's pretty easy to see.
Sure.
You have that glow coming off of you. So in your life, in your varied history as a leader, what barriers have you faced and how have you worked to overcome them? You talked about perhaps being a first generation of college student, first generation grad student, first generation entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, etc. What barriers have you faced?
Yeah, we don't have 4 days, do we?
No, we have just
because then I could scratch the surface of some of these barriers. But I tell people too, like, I think it's actually in the valleys where my character has grown the most, and they're the places that I most want to talk about. So that's why I asked if we have like 4 days, because there's so many things that I could talk about,
Sure.
from a barrier perspective. But I think one big one is this idea of imposter syndrome, right? I think I didn't even know what that was. Yeah. But the minute that I heard that word, I was like, oh, there are others? Oh, this is not something that I just made up in my head.
Right. We're out there.
Yes, right? And I think, like, I actually got a lot of peace just by knowing that those two words existed, because it was something that I felt a lot and feel, right? Real time, feel a lot, but didn't know how to describe. And in some instances felt embarrassed that I was feeling that way. But just think about that, right?
Sure.
When you are going into a space where nobody looks like you,
Right.
where you don't really have anybody that you can look to and say, hey, what's expected here? That can be a very, very lonely space. And every time you see somebody look a little sideways or kind of have that look when you walk in, it can start to undermine, right? And actually feed into this idea of, do I really belong here? Did I really earn this spot? Am I really ready for this challenge? And so I think that was one of the biggest barriers. I always tell people, like, I have this voice in the back of my head, and it's got this like really annoying sound, and it just
Okay.
And so what I like to do now, I didn't always have this skill, but I will like turn around, literally. Okay, I'm taking you. Maybe this is too deep, but I'm going to take you into this space.
Audience, are we here for it? The audience says yes.
Okay, fantastic. I'm so glad to hear it. But this, and sometimes I will turn around, literally, and I will say, excuse me, but I do not like your tone. You might have some really constructive things to share with me, and I will be ready to receive them when you can use words that actually will uplift us both. And I will talk to my little voice like that. The other thing that I will do, and this is a little trick of the trade, right, is that voice is actually very loud. It's, it's just, I won't do it much longer because I know some people are listening to this and I don't want to hurt give you a headache or anything, right?
Okay.
Sometimes it's just really loud. But I have learned to actually take whatever that is, whatever that fear is or that negative, whatever it is, and to write it down. But when I write it as small as I possibly can. And what it does is it takes that, and it takes it into
minimizes that voice.
Right?
Minimizes the voice.
Yeah, and that's nothing. You could put a sound machine on. You can't even hear that anymore. And so I have just really come to like embrace it, because there is something that you can learn when that voice is talking to you, but there's also things that you can do to actually manage it. So I would say one of the biggest barriers is just having that imposter syndrome and trying to figure out what would work for me to be able to tone it down, to get it to a place where it's helpful and not restrictive.
Right. And so I like what you said about imposter syndrome. And I'm not sure if you even know that you said this, but there seems to be this prevailing thought that at some point we may have imposter syndrome if we walk into a space or a role that people who look like the way we may look, or from an area of the world that we're from, don't usually occupy. And there's this sort of prevailing inference that once you become successful, you can overcome that idea. Right?
What a lie.
But you're right. You told us that it's still there.
Oh, yes.
We just you specifically have found ways to minimize its voice. And I think that's really something important for our audience to hear, because they may be going through the same issues with imposter syndrome. They may face the same struggles, but now they have a very tangible strategy to use. And I think that I will use that strategy. I may not turn around and talk to myself. I don't know how that's going to play in some of the rooms that I'm in, but I know how to write in a very small font and a very small size. So I will be taking you up on that one. I'll use that.
Fantastic.
So
I can't wait to hear how it goes.
Yes. And so let's transition a little bit to your work. Your purpose, I should say, is in working to shift the power to marginalized communities,
yes.
Right? Okay. That's very different. I like the way you stated that.
Thank you.
Tell us about that a little bit, because I have a follow-up question. Tell us about why you decided to word it in that manner.
Yeah, well, I think that is critical kind of in the way that we talk about power. I think it's important to distinguish that everybody has power. So that's kind of what I had mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And so if we're shifting power to marginalized communities, what we're doing is we're taking what people already have it, right? I don't think you go and give people already have it. But what we're doing is we're making sure that power gets pulled around, and that people understand how to utilize it, and people know how to access it, and people know how to benefit from it. So for me, that is really important. So that shifting power that was really intentional. And then 2, marginalized communities is really thinking about, well, who doesn't have, who often is told that they don't have power, who often doesn't get to exercise that power, who often gets their mic turned off, right? And
Right.
how do you make sure that you can use whatever tools and techniques that you have to turn that mic back on, to turn the spotlight back on, to make sure that the resources are allocated in a fair and equitable way. So those 2 components are really, really important. The idea that we're shifting power, because power's there. It's always there. It's
there.
here at this table. It's in the rooms. It's in the hallways.
Right.
It's in the cafeteria. It's always there. But how are we making sure that those who get pushed to the margin are getting a chance to participate in it?
Wow. The image that, I'm a very image-based person.
Okay.
So the image that immediately popped into my mind is walking into a dark room, completely dark, and there is a light switch, but we don't know where it is.
We don't know where it is.
And we need somebody, and that's your work. From what I hear you saying, your work is to show us where the light switch is, show us how to use it.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that.
You use that.
Okay, see?
All right,
I love it.
We bartered today. We got it. I'm taking something from Deanna. Deanna's taking something from me.
I love it.
All right. So you have a very broad background. There are so many there's so many pieces of work that you have. And one of those pieces of work is literacy.
Yes.
I've noticed that you are an author.
I am.
At least 2 times, working on 3?
6 times.
6. Okay, there were 2 that I saw, and then one more that's coming up. So tell us about why did you decide to become an author? Because what I'm really getting at is, how is literacy a part of the work that you do each day, or part of your purpose?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and tell this story quickly.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I do think that, especially knowing the audience, that this one may be of interest. So in one of my many roles, my job was to be an advocate for children. And at one point, I was able to gather all of these people from different spaces. So we had people who had political power, we had people who had, financial power, we had people in the education space, just all the spaces that you would think needed to be gathered. And the question on the table that I put in front of everybody was, how do we get off the list here in Milwaukee of being the worst place to raise Black and brown boys?
Man.
And that was the question, right? And I remember that day I got up, I was excited, like, yes, we have all the right things, right? When you think about how you solve a problem, we have all the right resources coming to the table. Today is going to be about solving this problem. Okay. And I remember I went into this meeting with all this hope and joy and optimism. And instead of it being a conversation about the potential and possibility of our children, it was like that voice, that's in the back of my head, but even more agitating, like, rah, 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 we can't do this. We've tried that before, And I just remember, like, really in that moment, having to make a decision. On the one hand, I wanted to flip the table over, and I could just imagine, like, being in the, front page of the newspaper, conversation I was going to have with my husband later on about how I lost my job that day, like the whole thing, right? That was one direction. I have to be honest, like, that was a real possibility. And then the other direction was to kind of come back to myself a little bit. Okay. And I to figure out how I was going to find my peace. Because I'm actually a very joyful person. And so for me to get to that level just shows you sort of what was happening in that space. So anyways, I reached into my purse. Thank goodness I didn't flip the table at the same time. But there was that like split second moment, right?
Okay, could have happened.
And I pulled out a pen and a piece of paper. And what I did was I wrote a love letter to my children. So they were very young at the age. I think they were like 4 and 8 or somewhere around there. So I write this love letter to my kids. And basically I said, hey, if something happens to myself or to your father, there are some things that you need to know about yourself, because there is a real PR problem around Black and brown boys right now. And I'm afraid that you are not going to get the message that you should hear. And here are all the things that you need to know about yourself. Wow. So I wrote this letter. I was in a room, where the lights automatically turn on and off. When I looked up, all the lights were off. Everybody was gone. I didn't even say goodbye to anybody, which is also not like me, because I was so focused on trying to get myself back to where I needed to be. And so I wrote this thing. Thought it was going to be just this cute little thing I give to the kids, this and that. the more I looked at it, the more I thought, no, you know what? This is actually how I feel about all the children that I've had the opportunity to work with. And really the reason it came from being this love letter to my kids to being a book is I thought to myself, it was that same night after I made it into a pretty PDF and everything, I was like, in my head, I wanted my kids to be like, Mommy, this is so amazing, But in my head, it was more along the lines when I thought about it for sure. It was more along the lines of, like, of course, like you tell us this all the time. So I thought, let me go get reinforcements. I'm a book lover. I love books so much. I married an English professor. Okay. So this is like a real thing.
Yeah.
Real thing.
You're a fan, like you said.
I'm a fan. And so I was like, okay, let me go because my kids are they expect this from me. This is how I talk to them all the time. But let me go get some books to reinforce. And I could not find any books that featured positive images of little black boys, little brown boys. So that's when I got the notion, like, you know what? If this is the case, then if we say in education, and you can ask anybody who's a reading specialist, especially at the younger ages, how do you get a kid excited about reading? One of the number one things they will tell you, the research shows it, you have to help a child find themselves in the book. So when I started to see these statistics, right, and they were way, way worse than they are right now. But when I looked at the statistics, more than 50% of our school-age children of color, represented it in less than 14% of books. You look at the picture books, less than 1%.
Wow. That's very telling.
So if we have a literacy problem when they're getting to be school-age children, but we know that one of the key factors is here, then we have that's a root cause. So I was like, forget this. I'm gonna give these to my babies. And when I say babies, I mean capital B-A-B. Wait, right. I want to spell it right. I-E-S.
Yep, I-E-S.
But I'm gonna make sure that they all, because this is how all of our children deserve to see themselves. So the first book was I'm a Boy of Color. And then, of course, I started going around talking and reading the book, and all the kids, boys included, kept coming up to me, Miss Singh, what are you going to write? I'm a girl of color. And I'm like, I actually am a girl of color. So let me go ahead and get that book. Let me get that book out.
So by popular demand.
My popular demand. And that really started this trajectory. And I think for me, like, the power of literacy is so phenomenal, because I think I didn't realize, even being a lover of books, right? I did not realize how transformative a book can be. Because when you think about it, a book can go places that you might not ever be. Right? So when I get like an email from somebody in South Africa, and I get something from somebody in England, and I get something from somebody in Iran, these are all people who were looking for the same thing for their children, and they found the book as a tool. Wow. Right? These are places that I hope I get to go, but I might not ever.
So you've received communication from all over the world?
All over the world.
Really?
All over the world.
Which piece of communication, or which letter or email or whatever it was, which one resonates with you the most? Which one, or which series of them?
There's so many, but I will tell you, I had this one experience. I can't even remember what state I was in. I may have been Iowa or Ohio, something. I was not in Wisconsin. And I actually was there for some other organization not related to anything I've ever done in education. And I was at a barbecue. And this woman kept looking at me. She just kept looking at me. And then she looked at me, and she came over and she goes, Are you Deanna Singh? And I was like, I mean,
so this
it depends on who's asking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this is not an email. This is a face-to-face encounter.
And so I'm like, yeah, I am. She's like, I have to tell you this story. And I'm going to try not to cry, because it was really a touching moment, right? But she said, I want to tell you a story. She said, this is a white woman. She said, my husband and I adopted a black boy. And we had this whole process, and adoption is a big process. She said, but in the process, their family kept saying, "But why are you doing this? But why are you doing this? But why are you doing this?" And actually, one of the members of the family, the mother-in-law, got very angry. Right? I can't believe you're going to adopt a black kid. You have no business. Blah 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of tension in the family, obviously, right? So on the day that they brought their son home, at that point, the tension was as high as it could possibly be, because they were moving forward and they were so excited, but they had this person who they wanted to be a big part of their child's life. And she said, so we brought our son home, and, we were all excited and trying to get everything ready and everything. And there was a knock on the door, and my mother-in-law was standing there, and she had a basket. And at the top of the basket was your I Am a Boy of Color book. Wow. And she said, I have a lot to learn, but I really want to try, and I'd really like to meet my grandson.
Wow.
Right? Total stranger. And you just think about the power of somebody being able to find a way to reconnect to their family in a moment, right, where there was just a misunderstanding. But what an opportunity to be able to say, to use this text in a way that I never, right? How could I imagine that? To be
Wow.
able to bridge and bring a family back together again.
I can't imagine. I can't. And I wonder, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I know your purpose is to shift that power. Did you imagine it, manifesting in that way?
Absolutely
through
not.
The story that you told.
So I wrote another book called Purposeful Hustle. And one of the things I tell people all of the time is that if you are living in your purpose, inevitably what it does is it gives other people the opportunity to live in theirs. That's one of the most beautiful things about being in your purposeful hustle. So there's so many things, right, that I've done, like eyes closed, like what is happening? I can't, but I knew that it was going to be aligned with my purpose and that there was some bigger calling. And the way that it manifests itself, over and over and over again in ways that I never could have even dreamed.
Step out and take a leap, right?
Yeah.
Just do it.
You don't know who's waiting for that or
Right.
who needs it.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let that be a lesson, audience. Walk in your purpose.
Walk
Be
in
a
your purpose.
Purpose-driven person. Yes. Earlier, you talked about in your work of shifting power to marginalized communities, you talked a little bit about education is a key tool and component of that. Let's drop down a little bit to a subset of education, which I believe is literacy. How is literacy connected to your work of shifting that power?
Yeah, so I think, and I can share kind of
Sure.
from my own personal experience. So I also, as a child, was one of very few children of color in my school.
Me too.
And that experience, right, changes and shifts kind of the way that you interact with the educational system.
Very much.
And I found that the minute I was able to connect with characters that looked like me, that had experiences like me, it really did help validate some of my own feelings that I was going to. And so in many ways, my books were my greatest friends. I often tell the story. So the first book that I ever read that had as a main character a Black girl in it was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry.
Okay.
I can almost do the whole poem by heart, even 40-something years later. But I got that book, right? And I checked the book out of the library so many times. I slept with the book. I would sneak into my closet. Well, I thought I was being sneaky. Now that I'm an adult, I realize everybody probably knew what I was doing. But I would sneak into my closet and I would read this book over and over again. And it became so much so that it was like tattered. And I remember one day I came to our beautiful librarian and I was going to just check the book out again. And the librarian said, "Deanna, you can have it." For her, the book was falling apart. Nobody else had ever checked it out. I was the only person. But to me, there was literally no greater gift she could have given me. And I still have the book. And so when I wrote the book, I wrote a book for American Girl. It's called The Girl's Guide to Race and Inclusion. And they did this interview and they were talking about it. And I just said, I tried to write the book that I wish I had had when I was a child. Because the power of literacy is that all of a sudden it takes this, what can sometimes feel confining or small world or a world where maybe you don't really feel like you fit in. And what we can do is just expand it. And all of a sudden, I can be best friends with a neuroscientist. And all of a sudden, I can go on an adventure. And all of a sudden, I can go back in history or go into the future. Or all of a sudden, I can be in the wild. Right? And I can explore these spaces that maybe weren't meant for me. Or maybe that don't feel inviting for me. Or maybe I don't really see myself in until somebody puts the words on the paper and invites me. So when I think about literacy, it's not just like, oh, you can get a good job, which of course, obviously we know that. We know that that's connected. Or, oh, you can, have more access. No, really like having literacy, I think helps your imagination explode.
Okay. what is the most rewarding aspect of your work? What is it that when you go home, I always say this, right? Our day is really cluttered, right? There are people, there are voices, it's all sounds, right? You go home, you spend time with your family. Even for me, I go home, prepare for bed. My wife is on the other side of the bed. But at some point before I fall asleep, the only voice that I can hear is mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't run from that voice.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And if I try really hard, the other voice that I'll hear is God.
Yeah.
Right? So when it's your turn
Mm-hmm.
for sleep and it's just Deanna and the pillow, what is the most rewarding aspect of your work? What do you sit back and say, yeah, I think I did well with that?
Yeah. For me, there is nothing more intoxicating than being able to watch somebody thrive. And
Spoken like a true educator.
the moment that you see somebody see themselves in the light that you see them, right? Because so often the person who's dimming that light, to your analogy earlier, who's pulling
Right.
is ourselves. But the minute that you get to witness somebody turn that light on full blast and stand in the power of being able to see who they fully are, to me, that is just, like there's a lot of different ways that you can measure a person's life. And so when I think about like what is the legacy, right, that I would like to leave behind, it's not about a title. I'm so delighted about this award, and
Sure.
but it's not about that, right? It's not about the accolades. It's not about how much money is in your bank account. It's not even about how much money you've given away. For me, at the end of the day, it's how much have you been able to be an influence, a positive influence in other people's lives. Because the people who live on for me, right, the people who have passed on,
Right.
the people who live on for me are the people who took a moment to enhance my story, right, who took a moment to see me for who I fully am, who are the people who gave me the book in the
Right.
library because they
Right.
could see how connected I was. The person who said, you know what, I know this is really scary, but you can do this. The person who said, here's a college application. You want me to sit next to you? And I can show you how to do this. And I can, right? It's those people who took the time to pour into me, which is why I think I feel like I'm always overflowing, right?
Right.
That's the legacy. That's where you really measure yourself. And my father taught me this a really long time ago. But he said that if you measure yourself by how well you are doing, you have already failed. The only way you can measure yourself is by how those around you are doing. And that is just like, that's so tied to the core of who I am.
Right. That reminds me of an exercise that I used to do with some of my students who were studying to be teachers when I was a professor at the university. And we do this exercise early in their program. They were undergraduates, not even 20 years old yet. And we take stock of who our favorite teachers were.
Oh, I love that question.
In our lives, right?
I love that question.
And there was always the question of, why was this person your favorite teacher? And what we always found, semester after semester, wasn't the teacher that we thought was the smartest.
Nope.
It wasn't the teacher who, if it was a history teacher, knew all the battles and knew all the dates, or the math teacher who really taught the Pythagorean theorem well. It was the teacher who made the connection.
Yep.
It was the teacher who had the ability to listen, to communicate effectively, and want to see the student thrive.
Yes.
It's that personal connection.
It
That's
is.
what, and I know there are a lot of educators listening to this podcast, but the key to doing well in life, and what you said is the legacy, is that connection.
Absolutely.
Is that connection with people. So tell us what's next for you. What's going to happen, for the rest of 2024 and leading into 2025? Are there any projects that you'd like to share
Sure.
with
So
our audience?
there's a couple of big things. So our company is actually called Flying Elephant, and we have 5 enterprises that all fit into Flying Elephant. So each one of those companies has something exciting that's happening. But the latest one is actually called the Uplifting Mansion.
Okay.
So we bought a 8,000 square foot mansion, and it has 4 different levels in it. But for us, that's it's an embodiment of what we want to leave as our legacy. So each one of those floors actually represents one of our core values. So we have a residence on the top floor, which really is all about love. So love is a core value of our company. Our third floor is called the collaboration floor. So we're looking for entrepreneurs, particularly social entrepreneurs who are trying to make the world a better place. So that's our collaboration floor, which is another core value. Our first floor is actually an event venue, so we can seat up to 100 people. I mean, it's this beautiful ballroom. It's absolutely gorgeous, but that is where our embodiment of our value of joy. So how do we put joy in every corner of that building? And then our first floor, or the garden level, is actually where we represent growth, because we really believe that, like we said, you fail every day, but you grow every day too. And you have an opportunity to grow every day. So that growth level, we're looking for people who support entrepreneurs. So technologist, a CPA, an attorney, because we have a number of offices and some shared spaces. So our big thing is to really make sure that we are being good stewards of that space and making it an incredible asset for our community.
And when is this planned to open? When is this planned?
Oh, it's open.
Oh, it's open now.
Yeah. Oh, it's open. And we are in operation and learning every day, again, how to make sure that everyone who comes into the mansion really feels like it's our OUR, all capitalized, home.
Okay. And you're still looking for participants. Is that what I hear?
We are.
You are.
We are.
So if you're interested in looking at, tell me the name of the mansion.
It's called the Uplifting Mansion.
The Uplifting Mansion.
Yes. And if you are interested.
How can they contact you?
Yeah. So if you're interested, you can actually go to upliftingmansion.com. But if you're interested in any of the other services that we provide, or the books, or any of that, a really great place to stay connected is LinkedIn. I am a LinkedIn influencer, so I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and we try to give away resources and really be accessible that way.
Sure. And as our interview comes to a close, we want to thank you, Deanna, for your time.
This has been great.
It has been a wonderful conversation with you, just picking your brain about how you go about doing your business. And I will forever take with me the idea of shutting down that voice, that annoying voice that's in the back of our heads. And so, audience, as we prepare to close another episode of UTalks, if you would like to get your hands on a solid copy of one of Deanna's books, you can get one of those books at the ULC Fall Ball on Saturday, October 19th. Please see the ULC website for more information. As always, please remember to like, follow, subscribe, and as we always say on UTalks, leadership begins with you. Actually, me, but you too. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you looking to take the next step in leadership? Are you looking to grow as a leader? If so, I have the perfect program for you. Leadership Develop You, sponsored by Urban Learning Collaborative, is now accepting applications for its first cohort of leadership development programming. You can find the application and apply at urban-learning.org. Again, that's www.urban-learning.org. We look forward to seeing you in that next cohort.